Aloha Hawaii, this is Pokalai Nui and you are listening to Hawaiian Potpourri. It is now 8 minutes past the hour of 4 o'clock on KWAI. We are broadcasting from the top of the Chinese Cultural Plaza here in Honolulu, Hawaii. Welcome to Hawaiian Potpourri. Today is the 18th day of August in the year 2012. And I would like to open the discussion, open our program, by discussing the issues of the international arena and pay some attention to that international arena. And let me say that as I do that, I am cognizant of the fact that in last week's discussion, we talked about bringing in new visions, a new quest for changes in Hawaii, and we'll get further into that in the later part of this program. The program goes for 2 hours, and what I try to do is sectionalize it or truncate it into half-hour portions at a time. So in this particular portion, we'll talk about international activities, and I begin this discussion by reference to an email that I received, and much of my information comes from the Interpress service. This is a news agency. It's an international news agency, and in this one it says that the United Nations chief is in the hot seat over non-aligned summit in Iran. And sometimes when you use these very simplistic phrases, you don't really catch the import of what they're talking about. For example, what is a non-aligned summit that is occurring in Iran? Already there's a suspicion based on the propaganda that we have heard about Iran, and something about this non-aligned summit. Isn't non-alignment actually supposed to be the better position to be in, rather than to be aligned or associated with one or another part of a controversy? To be non-associated, not taking sides between the communists and the capitalists, between the socialists and the capitalists again. And so the non-aligned movement in the international arena is an interesting arena. But anyway, let me begin the reading, and this comes out of the United Nations by Talif Dean. When I say out of the United Nations, reporting from the United Nations, but not necessarily a UN article. When Cuba chaired the non-aligned movement, it's called the NAM, back in 1979, Western nations dismissed the world's largest single political coalition as lacking legitimacy, since Havana was considered a close ally of the then Soviet Union. Taking the cue from the West, even some of the mainstream news organizations, as a matter of editorial policy, continue to cynically describe NAM as the so-called non-aligned movement right through Cuba's 4 years chairmanship, which ended in 1983. Still, both Cuba and NAM survived the name-calling and political vituperation. Okay, that's a new word for me. Despite an organized campaign to discredit the coalition as covertly pro-Soviet. With Iran taking over the chairmanship later this month, for the first time in the history of the 120-member NAM, the Western world is expected to react as negatively as it did to Cuba. Israel, which has threatened to unilaterally attack Iran on the ground Tehran is developing nuclear weapons, has urged Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to skip the non-aligned movement summit scheduled to take place in the Iranian capital August 26 through the 31st. The Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported last week that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu Netanyahu has personally appealed to the Secretary General not to attend the NAM summit, describing Iran as, quote, a regime that represents the greatest danger to world peace. But Ernest Correa, former Sri Lankan ambassador to the United States and author of Non-Alignment, The Dynamic of a Movement, told IPS that if Ban visits Tehran for the NAM summit, he will be following precedent and reaffirming the bond between the United Nations and the 120-member NAM. Of course, he should attend the summit, said Korea, but should keep clear of bilateral discussions with the Iranian leadership on matters within the purview of the UN Security Council, unless he is encouraged or authorized to do so by the Council. In an editorial titled UN Chief Should Boycott Tehran Conference, the Washington Post weighed in Wednesday, pointing out the conference promises to be a festival of resistance to the United States, the UN Security Council, and Israel. The editorial said that Ban may be hoping he can single-handedly persuade the Iranians to end their quest for nuclear weapons. That assumes a United Nations leader has more clout than anyone else who tried. We're told that Mr. Ban sees this as a crucial moment for a diplomatic last-ditch effort, but it doesn't seem even remotely likely to succeed. If these concerns are related to Iran's nuclear program, an Arab diplomat told IPS, why has the West continued to diplomatically avoid the question as to why Israel should have nuclear weapons but not Iran? Iran insists that its nuclear program is related to its growing energy needs and not aimed at making weapons of mass destruction. Chakravarti Raghavan, a veteran journalist who has covered the United Nations both in New York and Geneva for decades, told IPS, whether one likes it or not, NAM is a political gathering and represents the largest group of nations and members of the UN. Whatever the views and policies of the host, it would be a folly for the head of the UN Secretariat not to go there to present a UN view and not act as a partisan of U.S.-Israeli interests or Israeli lobbying groups in the U.S., said Raghavan, who has covered NAM summits from the very inception. He also pointed out that the Secretary General is only the head of the UN Secretariat in terms of the UN Charter, although U Thant, a former Secretary General, said at a press conference in the 1960s that the UN chief also acted as the conscience of humanity. Asked if Ban has plans to attend the summit, his deputy spokesperson, Eduardo Del Bue, told reporter last week, well, we see reports coming out of Jerusalem, and we have no trip to announce. If and when the Secretary General has something to announce, he will announce it, he added. Pressed for an answer Wednesday, he said, the media is full of reports and a lot of issues. We are not commenting on any proposed trip for the time being. I can continue repeating that if you like. I've been doing it for the past few days. In a statement issued Monday, the Anti-Defamation League, that's a strongly pro-Israeli lobbying group, urged Ban, quote, to make clear that he does not intend to travel to Iran later this month. In a letter to the Secretary General, the ADL said, your presence in the Iranian capital at this time will be counterproductive to the efforts of the international community to bring Iran into compliance with its obligations under the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and abandon its nuclear weapons ambition. ADL has not received a reply. Okay, I'm going to stop there and discuss with you what is in play as I read that article. You have an organization known as a non-aligned movement, and the number 120 members out of the United Nations General Assembly, which numbers up to about 190. So they are certainly a group that you cannot simply avoid as if they have no legitimacy. And much of these members come from African nations, those nations that had recently or that had received its independence probably after 1960, when there was this sweep of decolonization across the African continent. You have also many nations that are from the Pacific and Asia, those who also received their independence following the Second World War and the development of the United Nations, all part of that process of decolonization that went through the United Nations. And you still have that committee, the Special Committee on Decolonization, to continue to manage the process of decolonization for other non-self-governing territories. The United States has habitually attacked the non-aligned nations, especially when they have this group being chaired by Cuba previously, now Iran chairing this organization. And yet, from the American public mindset, and I'm sure it's also hitting the Israelis in the same way, the control of the media, the twisting of the perception, the propaganda that is coming out of the yellow journalism, out of the U.S. papers as well as out of some of the Israeli papers, are painting the picture that not only is it being chaired by evil empires, but that the organization, the non-aligned movement members, are evil themselves. And not only is this furthest from the truth, but what it does is it keeps people in ignorance to see the greater perspective of what is really going on, and it allows those people in power to continue to manipulate the masses by using fear, by using racial differences, by using religious differences, so that the hopes of the United Nations, which was essentially to elevate the human condition so that people would be able to live in peace, are being shattered by the American, and in this case the Israeli interest, continuing on their attack against now Iran, previously Cuba, and the almost crazy, or what is that, psychotic, is it? What mental illness term can I use? But it is a sense of abusing what the situation is. Should the head of the United Nations, whose majority of members will be meeting in this non-aligned movement, also attend that meeting and at least be present as is being suggested? Or should they not, or should he not attend, as Israel is trying to convince him not to, and not to get into any discussions with the Iranians, accusing the Iranians of wanting to start a war with Israel or get nuclear weapons so that they can contest the Israelis as well as the United States. One person commented on the fact that the question that no one seems to be asking is, what about Israel? Should they not also address the question of their legitimacy to possess nuclear weapons? And another question that should also be addressed is, what about the United States? Not only in their possession of nuclear weapons, but their participation in the proliferation of nuclear weapons by giving to Israel additional nuclear arms. And and I'm sure other countries participating in supporting their efforts of attaining nuclearization in weaponry. The United States also just went through some discussion, and the result was they were not willing to pass a law limiting the sale in the United States or from the United States to other countries weapons of war, arms, conventional arms. The amount of these bombs that they place in the ground, I forget, there's a specific term for it, and the amount of arms that is spread throughout the world that comes from the United States or paid through the United States it leads in the amount of arms that is being sold throughout the world. And yet the United States professes to be a leader in peace. Okay. And what about this question of Israel and the United States continually attacking Iran for Iran's denial that it has a nuclear weapons program? Iran has said over and over again that it is not weapons that we are looking for. We are looking for a new source of energy. The United States is saying, oh, we don't believe them. They really want to develop weapons. But when you ask, where is the factual basis for your conclusion? They say, well, we don't trust the Iranians. It's not a matter of trust. What have your own expert reports provided you? The last time they were actually trying to produce a nuclear weapon was way back in 2000. When was that? 2003. And since that time, then the CIA reports are consistent in that point. There have been no further move towards the development of weapons. But the United States and Israel follows a particular mentality of what they call a particular form of defense. You see, if you structure the idea of defense and what is the appropriate philosophy or theory of defense that a nation should carry forward, on one hand you have defense, on the other hand you have offense. Essentially, countries are saying you should not be offensive, you should be defenses. You should not have a Department of War, you should have a Department of Defense. The United States back prior to about 1945, I think, and earlier than that, what they had was Department of War. And then they changed the term. They called it Department of Defense, but other than the term changing, they still continued with the same mentality of a war department. You still had your Army, your Navy, your Marines. You created an Air Force just about that period of time. And they have been consistent in their approach to carrying out war, but changing the title to defense. With regards to your posture of national security, on one hand, as I said before, you have an offensive campaign, and on the other hand you have a defensive campaign. Whether or not you are in peacetime or in wartime, you can still have an offensive campaign by pushing yourself, by being aggressive, by establishing military bases in bordering nations or bordering states, establishing your bases to encircle another country. That seems to me to be very offensive. But they are saying, oh, we are just being prepared and we are being defensive. Okay. Within the idea of defense, you have what we can call defensive defense, or you can have what is called defensive offense. Now, in defensive defense, what you do is you are simply building a system so that if invaded, if attacked, you will be able to defend yourself and essentially stay within your territory. Now, what country is going to be so foolish, I guess, as to say that we will not go beyond our boundaries, but we will protect our borders, so if you attack us, we will defend ourselves? But even then, we will not go beyond our borders and chase you and attack you, even if you attack us. So, we are not an offensive, we are not to be seen as offensive. We are absolutely purely a defensive defense model. Take, for example, Switzerland. Switzerland follows a theory of defensive defense. You may be able to attack us, you may land some troops, you may invade us, and we will resist and we will make it very, very costly for you to occupy and to remain in Switzerland. But what we do is we promise you that we will not be an offensive arm and go out and attack you as a result of your attack against us. Now that's a very noble, secure, assured position that we can defend ourselves, but we don't want to make any threats to anyone. Therefore, you can count on our not attacking you, and there is therefore really no reason why you should be attacking us unless you intend to occupy, invade, and simply take over us. And then we'll make it very expensive for you to go beyond that. Another position is defensive offense. And in that position, what someone would say is, we are essentially a defensive national security policy. But in order to defend ourselves effectively, we need to watch what is happening in your country. And we reserve the right to attack you if we believe we have enough evidence that you will attack us. Now, that evidence is based on if we see you having war instruments and you are moving those weapons closer to our border, and there's no other explanatory reason why you are establishing bases in neighboring countries and your missiles are pointed to us, then we think at that point you are being offensive and we will be offensively defensive, reserving the right to initiate the attack against your armaments before you make a move. Okay, so that's one stage of offensive defense. Another stage is going even beyond that, and that is to say that we reserve the right to attack you even if we don't see your weapons, but we think you have weapons. Even if you deny it, even if you place or we place spies in your organization, and even if they say, no, there are no weapons, they are not in a program of developing weapons, but we claim that you are still developing weapons and you refuse to prove that you are not just saying it, you need to prove it. So on the other side, they're of course saying, how can I prove the negative? If we're not doing it, what more proof can I come out? This is the same thing Saddam Hussein was saying. How can I prove even further that we have no weapons of mass destruction? George Bush was saying, but we think you have those weapons, and therefore we reserve the right to carry on our offensive action against you as part of our policy of national defense. Now you are seeing that the United States, or any country who uses that kind of rhetoric, it's not even reasoning, is really playing with that rhetoric, and they are allowing that rhetoric to mask the reality. They are allowing rhetoric to create new fictions, and that's all that is happening with regards to Iran. The evidence, the proof is not there, but because of the saber rattling and the embedded media that is so closely associated with the Pentagon, with the White House, with Israel, and with the Israel lobbies, they are painting a picture of this warmongering on the part of the Iranians. Absolutely not true. Absolutely criminal as far as I'm concerned.
Kaulana na pua o Hawaii Kupa ama hope o ka aina Iki mai ka elele o ka loko ino Pala pala anunu me ka paka